Well. We're on, I believe, number 5 on PNSO's Tyrannosaur wave, and I'm on sore throat number 5 as well for this year. But happy to say that far from being a yawn, this is in fact Gorgosaurus, the other albertosaurine. That means that with Albertosaurus, we now have the full complement of 2. And what a beautiful render this is. Now this is Tristan the Gorgosaurus. He's about 27 centimeters or 10.6 inches from the snout to the tail tip. Gorgosaurus is estimated to be around 9 meters or 29.5 feet long. That makes this about 1 to 33 scale, but for 1 to 35, it'd still be a reasonable 9.4 meters or 30.8 feet. The tallest point is the top of the head here at about 9.5 centimeters or 3.7 inches. And here we have the 1 to 35 Wonder Artistic Models humanoid to give you an idea of its size. The name Gorgosaurus means fierce or terrible lizard, from the Greek gorgos and stavros, which is ironic because my overall impression is that you couldn't be further than the hideous gorgon than this model, which is a real beauty. First, the legginess really speaks to the albertosaurine form, which is ironic considering that Gorgosaurus used to look like this. And then the pattern. I love this pattern, and I'll tell you why. Now you know I'm a fan of the Dan's Dinosaurs dinosaur line, and I've reviewed a couple of models. Well, one of those I've always wanted but could never afford was this Gorgosaurus vs Pachyrhinosaurus diorama. And as you can see, the pattern and the colours are stunning. I think you see also the similarities here. Unfortunately, it's the same earth tones that PNSO seems to have an idée fixe on. But you can see how with a good pattern, even that can be forgiven. Of course, it would have been perfect in another colour scheme, even say black and white. Repaint idea. Then in the head, which you'll see more of later, you have these orange accents running down the lacrimal into the nasals, with a blue fade in the face. Beautiful. And then the pose. Now this is a very tentative, careful walk, as if sneaking past or up to something. But it also has a kind of an oh shit vibe to it, as if it had stepped on something unpleasant. So the whole package really is very nice right from the initial glance. Let's look at it a bit closer now. Now a few friends of mine have remarked on the rather juvenile appearance of this Gorgosaurus head. We do have good models of Gorgosaurus, and I think it fits an adult representation well enough. We'll talk more about this in the science part of the video. For now, let's just admire the beauty of this head, and there is a lot to admire. First of all, you can see the way the colours just go together, and how the top dark brown is contrasted with the bright orange of the lacrimal crests, and down the nasals. Very nicely blended this is. And here in the nasal, you see this fades into a lighter orange, which then segues very nicely to a blue tint in the maxillary area. And juxtaposition of complementary colours is always a winner. And the blend into the tip of the snout is perfectly faded. And the whole thing is just beautiful. And I'm happy to say in general that the quality of paint application is very close to the release image. Again, no lips. I feel like the teeth might just be a little bit too long and suggest some tooth slippage. And of course, the expected detail in the facial integument is there. Then the keratinous structures. Look at the mandible. And of course, do I need to say that the detail is very fine, as with all PNSO's offerings. You'll see with the jaw closed that PNSO has taken care to bulk up the throat area with muscle, based on muscle scars in the fossil. This is a very nice touch, except that when the jaw articulates, you'll see an obvious discontinuity. Inside, you can see more teeth. Thankfully, the teeth aren't too badly painted, and not in a way that would be obvious at normal viewing distances anyway. And of course, the other details like the rictors, and the tongue, and the palate. Now, Zhao Chuang does recognize that tyrannosaurids probably couldn't move their tongue much, which is why the tongues are always flat against the floor of the mouth. Now, moving down, we get to the body. And once again, the relative legginess of the albertosaurines is evident. The skin detail is, as always, wonderfully done. Now just look at the neck here, going down into the shoulder region. Look at how fine these scales are. And also notice the fineness of the creases. And there's no way we can ignore the beautifully faded stripes, which in this configuration makes for a very pleasing design. I really like the way these stripes don't parallel. And I especially love these longitudinal stripes down the neck here. And from the top, just look at it, just flows beautifully. And now a once over of the body. Just really can't get over the aesthetics of these stripes. You see here also the echoes of that orange in the sides. And it's even picked up here in the rear leg. And down the tail. Just wonderfully thought out. And then we go down the arms. Again, very fine detail. And the very long legs, the supermodel legs. The thighs. The legs. And the feet. And as with the previous Albertosaurus, the detail in the legs seems to have reached yet another pinnacle. And then down the tail. Just really love the fade in the stripes. I keep saying that, I know. And also a pickup of the orange accent on the ventral surface. Speaking of which, look at the underside. So that's it for the PNSO Gorgosaurus. Now before we get to the comparisons, let's talk some science. When you look at an albertosaurine, you can't help but notice its very lanky proportions, which are reminiscent of juvenile tyrannosaurids. In addition, just a less robust form of the skull in the albertosaurine might give you juvie vibes. In fact, looking at this model, you might wonder if it's based on an adult or a juvenile, something a friend brought up. We actually have many good fossils of Gorgosaurus. In fact, Gorgosaurus has gone a long way towards informing our understanding of tyrannosaurid life history, more than any other dinosaur. Juveniles, however, are quite rare. Voris et al. 2022 described 2 articulated juveniles that are so well preserved that we now have very good knowledge of the ontogenetic changes over time in Gorgosaurus. The paper describes 4 growth categories based on a combination of morphological markers. I won't list all of them, but the obvious ones are first, the absolute sizes. The juvenile growth category includes skulls that are less than 55 cm or 21.7 inches long. The subadult growth category has skulls between 55 to 70 cm or 21.7 to 27.6 inches long. The young adult growth category has skulls 70 to 80 cm or 27.6 to 31.5 inches long. And for the adult growth category, we're talking about skulls more than 80 cm or 31.5 inches long. Relatively speaking, you can see also that juveniles have shallower skulls relative to the length, and this deepens through the growth stages. The orbits start off circular, and with each life stage, the shape heads towards the final form we're familiar with in the adult. Cranial ornamentation is nascent and humble in origin, but become more prominent with each growth stage. And in general, you'll also see the maxilla, the nasal, the lacrimal, and the postorbital bones get increasingly rugose. And of course, all these are features you'd hardly expect to see expressed on the model. Unfortunately, the paper also tells us more that helps us differentiate between juvenile and adult. So here we have 2 skulls. The juvenile is based on an amalgamation of features from TMP 2016.14.1 and TMP 2009.12.14. The adult is based on UALVP10. Now the paper delves into fascinating detail in the anatomical features, but we'll look at a few more obvious ones. The juvenile skull is shallow and narrow. Now the length to depth ratio is between 3.9 to 4.1, so let's say 4.0 on average. In the adult, this length to depth ratio is about 3.4, and I think you can see that our Gorgosaurus follows more the kind of ratio seen in an older animal. Now seen from above, you'll see that the adult has a wider skull and a correspondingly more dramatic taper. In the temporal area, the width is almost twice as wide as the snout. In the juvenile, you'll see a lot less of a difference. In our model, the taper is obviously more similar to an adult than a juvenile. And going back to this diagram, we see that the lacrimal horn here, while more pronounced than in a young adult, looks less so than in a full adult. So perhaps this represents a growth stage somewhere in between. And finally, in juveniles, the premaxillary tooth row is parasagittally oriented, meaning pointed straight down, so all teeth are visible in the lateral view. In adults, they're directed mediolaterally, so only the lateralmost will be visible in the lateral view. And here we can see that, in fact, all the premaxillary teeth are visible. So perhaps this also puts it before a fully grown adult. And of course, I wouldn't be surprised if this wasn't something PNSO intended, but it's still plenty of fun to speculate on. In conclusion, I think it's safe to say that our guy looks more like an adult and definitely not a juvenile. So let's label this a not fully mature adult and call it good. And while we're on skulls, I just want to quickly slip in the fact that besides obvious differences in the proportion and robustness in the head and body, there are also subtler differences in the skull between albertosaurines and tyrannosaurines, relating to the bone shape and the joint sutures. Now, I don't want to bore you to death, but I just can't help myself. But a few of them are. Albertosaurines have a more prominent maxillary flange, as you see in this curvature here. And in albertosaurines, the ventral margin of the jugal quadratojugal contact slopes forward and up at about 45 degrees, but not so in the tyrannosaurines. The posterior ramus of the postorbital terminates anterior to the posterior dorsal margin of the laterotemporal fenestra. Try saying that 3 times fast. Now, this obviously isn't the case in T-Rex. Obviously, these are differences that won't be seen in the outward expression of the surface anatomy, and if two genera don't have other obvious differences as well, you may well find them hard to tell apart in real life, such as Albertosaurus and Gorgosaurus themselves. There are still some people who believe that these two are the same animal. Alright, comparisons. Now, most obviously, we have got to look at the other Albertosaurine, Albertosaurus. And both really are highlights in PNSO's Tyrannosaur wave. First of all, both are nice representations of the Albertosaurine clade, and both are roughly about 1:35, which should make most of us very happy. And both are highly unusual in their poses. Now, this one, of course, has that running pose. And this one, that oh shit pose, and they really go well together, and are fine gems to add to the trove. They look very similar, but PNSO has also taken pains to ensure some differentiation. For example, based on osteological correlates, Zhao Chong believes that Albertosaurus would have had a lot more keratinization compared to Gorgosaurus, and you certainly see this here. And the direction of these projections are also different. I almost feel that Albertosaurus should have been named Izoida to go with Tristan. Then we can look at the other smaller tyrannosaurids. So here's the Spinosaurus, which actually was, I believe, contemporaneous with Gorgosaurus, but possibly occupying different niches. You can see how similar the limb lankiness is. Then the Lithonax, which, as I've said countless times, show us how paint colors really could be executed by PNSO, and I really wish they'd do more of this. Of course, we have the big boy himself, the Cameron T-Rex. And followed by size reference, the original Wilson T-Rex. And finally, I just wanted to show off the other beautiful theropod that reminds me so much of this, the PNSO Murexis. What a beautiful duo these would make on any display. So that's our PNSO Gorgosaurus. For years I've never had an Albertosaurine, let alone Gorgosaurus. And now to have both of them is really a feather in the cap for me. The color, while using the same old palette, is used creatively to create the striping pattern that's most pleasing to the eye. An unusual pose lends real visual interest and stimulates the imagination. And the coloration in the head and the face are beautiful improvements in general over even the Cameron T-Rex, which is a flagship of the current wave. Now, Gorgosaurus here doesn't mean terrible lizard, it means gorgeous lizard. What a stunner the whole thing is. I'm curious to see if PNSO will give us any more tyrannosaurids. But I really do hope we go back to the same unpredictable, exciting schedule of varied releases we used to have. And if Gorgosaurus is indeed the last tyrannosaur for a while, what a beautiful way to close out the wave. Now let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.